Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes and I'm delighted once again to be joined by Colin Watt. Welcome to the show again, Colin.
Thanks for having me back again, Paul.
Well, this is going to be a regular feature podcast where we've started off with cult heroes and we've looked at not only your and my Cult 11, but we're now going to be looking at the Celtic State of Mind Cult Hero 11 that was voted for by how many ACSOM listeners and readers?
So we had over 15,000 votes across the polls, which is absolutely incredible. And just want to take this opportunity to thank all the listeners and the readers for their contributions. I think there's still arguments going on to this day, and that was over a year ago now, so it certainly caught the attention.
It did, and there'll be a few disagreements on this lineup. It's not one that I particularly agree with, certainly some of the votes that came in. So tell us about how we set up the poll, Colin, how we got a shortlist.
What actually happened was we reached out. We have a group chat amongst ourselves, the ACSOM contributors, and we looked for some suggestions for everyone's cult heroes. We narrowed it down to 4 for each position, and we put it out for the listeners to put a vote on it so that they could have the final say. Some people decided that their favourite or their cult hero wasn't there. And that actually changed some of our opinions, and it changed one of the polls that we'll get into later on. Mm-hmm. But I think if we go back to it, Paul, there's still this definition of what is a cult hero. And for some people, some of the suggestions that we get in for cult heroes it was wild.
It was bonkers, you're right. So these suggestions come from the Celtic State of Mind contributors, of which at the last count, Colin, we're sitting on 18. We've got 18 people who contribute to the podcast and to the site. And whenever we are, for example, voting on a man of the match, we ask the group via WhatsApp, which has been in the news recently this week, Colin, the WhatsApp groups. Sometimes they can
not very secure now, are they?
They can be your downfall if somebody does a screenshot and shares it. But we share our views on WhatsApp, and then we'll put out a vote on the top 3 man of the match. And that will actually result this season in the ACSOM Player of the Year. And there will be a presentation. We will present that player with an ACSOM award. Whether or not they accept it is entirely up to them, but we will be presenting it to them. And that's how we come about the poll as well. We had a short list of 4 players, as you say, for each position. So we will get started, Colin, on the first position, the goalkeeper. Who were the options for the cult goalie?
So we had my selection, which was David Marshall. We had your selection, which was Peter Latchford. And we also had Magnus Hedman, which is a very interesting choice. He'd probably throw the ball into his own net. But our winner, with 90% of the vote, was Artur Boruc. Mm-hmm. Now, I think I said on my podcast when we looked at the best 11 that I've seen live, I think Artur Boruc was the goalkeeper I chose. And I think it was also the same with Kevin Graham. So we're getting into this stage now, is he a legend or is he a cult hero? And certainly for the person that picked him, they've went with him being a cult hero, and 90% of the fans agreed with him. So I don't know what you think about that.
I think it's interesting for a selection like Boruc because there's two points to the makeup of Artur Boruc. First was he was classed as, by Gordon Strachan, a world class goalkeeper. That's interesting because that's a guy who's worked with him day in and day out over a number of seasons. Secondly was he had it in him to behave in a way that would get him into trouble, be that on or off the pitch. And some of that behaviour actually endeared him to the Celtic support. So, for example, blessing himself, you should be able to bless yourself. Absolutely no question about it. And he did. And he was derided for it. And there was some footage on Twitter just the other week there going on about how there would be no case to answer for Artur Boruc because it was potentially inflammatory to bless himself. You know, so that type of thing, it may endear you to some sections of the Celtic support, but he should have been allowed to do that in any case. There was then the occasions where he took off his goalkeeper's jersey and was wearing a God Bless the Pope t-shirt underneath. Again, he should be entitled to do that, right? How on earth would that be inflammatory? But it would endear him to the Celtic support or sections of that. And then there was also the tales that you got about him smoking in the changing room, you know, just that attitude. I remember images were released of him having a party and he was, in his apartment with several females and all that kind of stuff. So he had that kind of, that cult attitude about him where he smoked cigarettes, he liked a drink, he liked a woman, and he misbehaved. And often that is enough to put you into the cult category as long as you perform on the pitch. But he performs so well, Colin, that not only is he regarded as a cult player, but he is often cited as the greatest goalie that people have seen playing for Celtic as well. Absolutely,
and there's just a new thing I've seen on Amazon Prime. I don't know if it's new or if it's been out there for a while, but it takes you back to the 2006 World Cup, and he was playing for Poland in that World Cup, and also alongside him on that side was the Magic Zdravsky.
Yeah.
But he was Poland's number one goalkeeper. He was a fan favourite at Legia, and then for whatever reason, that was him. He came on loan to Celtic, and I don't know if that says a lot about his character, that managers just couldn't work with him. And I think Gordon Strachan certainly got the best out of him. And to be fair to him, he definitely has matured, and he's went on to have a fantastic career post-Celtic. But you still see that sort of kind of child in him, especially when Rangers played Legia this year, and he was in with the Ultras at Ibrox, so there's still a bit of the madman about him.
That was great to see, wasn't it? I mean, an interesting thing was covered in our recent podcast with Scotty Allcroft. He was talking about the interview he did with Stan Collymore, and Martin O'Neill says to him that he didn't have the head for Glasgow. I think that is such an important thing when you sign for Celtic, is the fact that you are going to be under scrutiny 24/7. The minute you walk out your door, you're going to be under scrutiny. And, there's certain things there that I've maybe mentioned that Boric got up to having a drink or, womanising, these types of things. So many players do it and it isn't reported on. The minute you do it as a Celt and there's a headline, then you might end up being the victim of a scoop in the tabloid rags in Scotland.
Definitely.
And but to be fair, I don't think Boric cared. I think he went about his business and he didn't care what people said or reported about him. But his record speaks for itself, as you say. Still playing, he's still a top-class goalkeeper, and he makes it into some of the all-time greatest 11s on previous podcasts on here. But yeah, cult goalkeeper, I probably couldn't argue, to be honest with you. I obviously gave you my reasons for picking Peter Latchford, after Boric, cult legend.
So moving on, the team is set up as a 4-4-2. So at right back, we had the options of Rudy Vata, which you chose. Mine was John Perrier Doumbé and his interesting facts. But the other two options that were out there were Andreas Hinkle, and the winner of the poll was Enrico Annoni. So Ono Annoni's in here now too. But he wins with 60% of the vote. So I think what was interesting about this was Enrico actually picked up on it himself.
He did.
And you had the chance to meet him after that, and he was absolutely delighted to be part of the team.
He was delighted to be part of the greatest 11. He said it was a privilege and an honour. Enrico's Twitter page is worth following because he's always very, when he's talking about Celtic, he always does it in glowing terms. I think he really enjoyed his time at Celtic. The interesting thing about Enrico Annoni, when he came over to do a few events last year, his Celtic career was part of a very successful career that he had already had. I mean, when you think about what he did in Italy and the players he played against in Italy, top quality players, and then he came over and obviously plied his trade in Scotland. And at that time there was quite a few Italians playing in Scottish football. Colin, you had Canio playing for Celtic. Bruno was playing for Hearts. I think Hearts had a couple of Italians, but they did come over and they seemed to do pretty well in Scottish football, to be fair. And Annoni, what I found interesting when he came over, we were doing a gig in Dundee and it was in a boozer, like a proper spit and sawdust boozer, and I was sitting waiting on Annoni arrive, and I was sitting with Tosh McKinley actually in the corner, and the bogs, it wasn't quite train spotting standard, the worst toilet in Scotland, but it was a proper bog, right? And unbeknown to me, Annoni was bringing his translator along for the evening, and his translator just so happened to be his daughter, who just so happened to look as though she had just walked off a Milanese catwalk. So she comes into the Dundonian boozer, and the first thing she asks is where the toilets are. and I just thought, welcome to Dundee, because what she was going to be faced with, Colin, probably isn't what she is used to. Anyway, it was a great night, and I know he regaled us with tales of his football career, not just at Celtic, but he loves Celtic, and you're right, he was delighted to be chosen. One other point I would make on the right backs, we've already explained our two in Vata and Doomby. I was a bit surprised at Andreas Hinkle getting in there. I would never have classed him really as a cult player. What's your thoughts on that?
Do we name the person that picked him? Because he's got a lot to answer for when it comes to the rest of this poll, Declan. But I don't know. Hinkle's an interesting character. He was certainly a workhorse for Celtic, and he gave his all. I thought he was probably Celtic level or better. I know he had his performance for Stuttgart when he came over here, and I think he got torn apart that night when Celtic beat them 3-1. But he went on to have quite a few caps for Germany, and I thought he was a very good player, to be perfectly honest. Maybe the cult hero side of it comes from his TV advert over in Germany where he was dressed up as a cowboy.
I've not seen that. I'll need to dig it out. But I always viewed Hinkle as being one of the guys. He was around for about 3 years. He probably didn't play in as many games as he should have done. When he signed, he came with a good reputation. As you say, he was an international footballer for Germany. He signed him from Sevilla, and he was highly regarded. And I just never saw him as a cult. I just thought he was a highly professional right back who probably saw Celtic as being a way of keeping his place in the German national side, because Celtic were playing Champions League football on a regular basis. But he didn't really play regularly. He was in and out of the team, wasn't he? So yeah, I liked him as a right back. I thought for long periods of his time at Celtic he was the best right back we had. Mm-hmm. I'm just not sure I would class him as a cult player. He was more of a, I think he Hinkle, I think he people like Jiri Jarazic, guys that came and went, played in successful teams and then left. Mm-hmm. Never made a massive impression on us. But so I wouldn't agree with that in relation to him being a cult player, but obviously he wasn't voted anyway. The bold Enrico was. Tell us a story about the left back then, Colin, because this was probably the most controversial of the whole starting 11.
So where do we begin here with left back? So we had our selections for left back, and the original winner of the poll was Charlie Mulgrew. Charlie Mulgrew actually ran away with the poll, and it was only once we started seeing the reaction from the Celtic State of Mind fans that we realised. So what we had was we had to create a second poll because of the overwhelming response that we had, and we had to include Tosh McKinley and Stefan Mahe. Mm-hmm. Now this was actually what turned out to be the closest poll across all of the ones that we had. Okay, this only had 3 people in it as opposed to the rest of them having 4. But Stefan Mahe ended up winning this by 2% from Tosh McKinley, and Charlie Mulgrew wasn't that far behind either. So despite not being in the first original selection, people had spoken, and Mahe with the Tahe had to get into the team.
Mahe is definitely a cult player. I spoke to the late Graham Morrison, who was a youngster at Celtic during the period that Mahe was there, and he spoke about him as being an ultimate professional, when he came to Celtic. And what he was talking about there, Colin, was the way that he trained, the way that he conducted himself on a day-to-day basis. You got an impression about Mahe, probably because there was a few incidents, I guess, on the actual field of play, that he might have been a bit of a live wire, a bit of a loose cannon, perhaps. Mm. But the way that he was described by someone who was working with him day in, day out was he was a real pro, like the ultimate professional. He was a very good trainer. But I think when you look at the teams that he had played with leading up to signing for Celtic, he played with Rennes, which obviously we know all about Rennes through our European exploits recently. But he played for PSG. If you've spent any kind of time at that club and the way that club is set up as well, he played for PSG and Auxerre. And it's just unfortunate that when he left us, he went to Hearts. I don't know if you remember him in a Hearts jersey, but he ended up at Hearts. Yep. I think when you look at cult players, I do remember, I've mentioned a few times, he appeared on the back page of Not The View, great Celtic haircuts of our time, when he gave himself a Travis Bickle Mohican, and you just think this guy, he's not wired up properly. But he was, and obviously there was a time where, when he was sent off and he was like a raging bull. There's another Robert De Niro reference. So Stefan Mahe won that. He wasn't my choice. So you got the original choices there, Colin?
I do. It was actually very close in that one as well. So we had Charlie Mulgrew, Anton Rogan, Darius Wojciech, and Badir El Kaduri, and there was about 6% between the top three, and Badir El Kaduri came stone cold last.
Not surprisingly, to be honest.
Charlie Mulgrew won with 36% of the vote. Darius Wojciech was second with 33%, and Anton Rogan third with 29%. It's very, very close, and I think they're very similarly rated players, the three of those. And I think, obviously, you can only put 4 on a poll on Twitter, but it would have been interesting to put all 5 out there and see who would have actually won.
It certainly would have done. And I'm pretty sure when you're looking at the left back and the goalie, we may well have an ordering off or two on our hands as well when you're looking at this team. We've already done a lot of chat about one of the centre halves who's made it into the cult team.
Yes, we have indeed. He is in my all-time Celtic 11. He's probably in quite a few people's all-time Celtic 11. It is Bobo Baldé. So Bobo Baldé made it in with 68% of the vote. Now, we've already spoken about how Bobo Baldé is kind of on that borderline between a cult hero and a Celtic legend. Mm-hmm. But he came up against Paul Elliott, Mike Galloway and Effie Ambrose, and he ran away with it. So what's your take on that? I'd say Effie was probably the cult hero out of those 4.
Can you remind me of who my choice was of those 4?
I believe yours was Mike Galloway.
Mike Galloway. Mikey Galloway, who thereafter didn't make it into my cult 11. Mike Galloway was a bit of a cult, I would suggest. He was a bit of a cult, and obviously after his career ended tragically in a car accident where he was lucky to actually live. He was lucky to come out. He was in a coma, and I just felt that Mikey was one of the full-blooded types who we signed him from Hearts for about £500,000 at the time, and he was committed. He certainly was a committed player. He was very adaptable. Yep. Colin, you could play him. You know, he played full-back for Tommy Burns. He could play midfield. He played midfield for Scotland. He could play centre-half. He went through what would be described as a purple patch under Liam Brady, where he really was probably at the peak of his powers. Prior to us buying him, he'd scored, some really important goals for Hearts in Europe. And then he signed for Celtic and he scored a few for us in Europe. He scored against Partizan Belgrade. People might forget, the first leg over there. We got beat 2-1 and Galloway scored. They also scored against Geminal Ekeren away from home. But I've got a lot of sympathy for Mikey and how things have turned out for him. He has spoken to us. He's provided us with an interview previously. I think what we could probably do is go down and visit him and see how he's getting on once we get back to the stage where we're allowed to do that. But yeah, I've got a lot of sympathy for Mikey. I just think he, with a nickname like Mad Dog Mikey, that kind of thing, he had that about him, and it's just a shame that things turned out the way they did for him, and we wish him all the very best. Bobo Baldé, as you say, is on that line between is he a great or is he a cult legend. People look fondly at his time because he was one of Martin O'Neill's boys, wasn't he, Bobo? Mm-hmm. But
yep.
The listeners and the readers voted, and they voted for Big Bobo, and who am I to argue? I certainly wouldn't argue with him. So who's going to be partnering Bobo Baldé then? Partnering
Bobo Baldé at the heart of the Celtic defence is a very controversial character, to be honest. It's Ramon Vega. Now, Ramon Vega won 40% of the vote, and he was up against Darren Adie, Jonas Edvalson, and Daniel Mastorovic. So, interesting 4 to choose from there. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Shuggy was your selection. Yep. Darren was mine. I can't remember who the rest put in. But Ramon Vega winning with 40%. Pretty close, to be honest. There wouldn't have taken a lot of votes to put it in favour of Shuggy Edvalson, who finished second. But a guy that was there for maybe 6 months on loan from Spurs looked as if he was going to sign a permanent deal, despite the fact that he turned us down previously. A controversial character on and off the park, but he certainly done the job when he was here on his short-term loan spell.
He did. I just think he was a stopgap player. I was surprised he was voted into this. I just think he was a stopgap. He never set the world alight, to be honest with you. And he turned us down for Watford. When it came down to it, when he was moving from Spurs, he turned us down for Watford. Probably believed his own hype. And the story I always remember about Vega I was at his debut, he scored 2 against Aberdeen. And
Yep.
I remember his agent contacting Harvey Nichols in Edinburgh and saying that we need a lockdown, just to use that term because we're all locked down now. We need a lockdown because we've got some famous footballer coming in and he wants to have some kind of peace when he's shopping. So they arranged it, thinking that David Beckham might have been in town, and then in walks Ramon Vega and nobody even knew who he was. So I think he'd started believing his own hype, and it would have been the biggest mistake of his life, because when you look at the teams that he played for after Celtic, I think that speaks volumes. The highlight of his career would have been his time at Celtic, and I think he's admitted that he regrets not signing for us permanently. So again, he was voted, so who am I to argue? But I never look back on Vega and think, wow, what a player he was. He was just a stopgap. There was a few around about that time. He came, he got some trophies, probably the only trophies he ever won in his career, and then he left. And that's Ramon Vega in a nutshell for me. You can tell I'm not a big fan.
I mean, it's coming across that way. But as you said, he was a stopgap. He came in, he scored twice on his debut. I think he scored twice again in a Scottish Cup tie against Dunfermline maybe. And he was obviously part of the treble winning side, so there's not a lot that we can really argue against that. But you're right, he was just a stopgap. He came in as injury cover. One of the centre-halves definitely took a bad injury, and he came in and he was there, done the job, picked up the trophies and went back down to England, never to be seen of again. So I wonder if he still does that old trick with any time he goes into some of the big department stores down south.
I just wonder if he bought anything, and if so, what it was. Anyway, moving on into the midfield. How's the midfield shaping up? So
we're starting with our right midfield, and we had Didier Agathe, Willie Faulkner, Stevie Murray, and Shinsuke Nakamura. Now, my choice was Didier Agathe. I believe you went with Willie Faulkner. And Nakamura was in my all-time Celtic 11 that I had seen, because he was just so technically gifted. But he's won the vote here with 72%. And again, I feel that's a popularity vote. I don't think he's an actual cult hero.
No.
As I was mentioning earlier about the 2006 World Cup, he was at that and he scored against Australia. He's still playing to this day.
I know.
And he literally is the David Beckham of Japan. So if David Beckham's a cult hero, then I'll agree Nakamura's a cult hero, but we know that's just not the case.
No, absolutely not. Nakamura is the type of Celtic player who would be voted in, these greatest Celts that I've seen playing. So of a certain period, he was one of the most entertaining, most gifted players that we had. He's not a cult hero, absolutely not. Someone that can perform like that and score those free kicks and live the way he lived. I mean, he was a clean, living, professional footballer who is still playing to this day, which proves the fact. No way is he a cult, so I've got to disagree. I mean, I'm tearing up some of these and it's an ACSOM poll. I'm going against some of the votes, but that's just the way that I look at a cult player. Nakamura is not that. I mean, when you think of Willie Faulkner, right, Colin? In the early 90s, you're looking at Willie Faulkner. And we used to sing from the slopes of Hampden Park during the 94-95 season, "Ooh ah, Willie Faulkner." And we did do it. And there's people listening to this podcast nodding their head thinking, wow, desperate times. So to say that I would pick Faulkner over Nakamura, people might think I'm off my head. However, I would on this occasion for a cult team. We're looking at more of the kind of cult players rather than the ultra-talented ones. So I think you're right. It was a popularity contest in a lot of people's eyes, and that's why he won it, and that's why he got his place. Who else is playing in the midfield?
So moving into centre midfield now, our first 4 selections were Pat Stanton, Massimo Donati, Vic Davidson and Lubo Moravcik. And this one was almost as cutthroat as the goalkeeper selection. Winning with 89% of the vote was Lubo Moravcik. And to be honest, he was my pick. And we had this discussion when we looked at my team. I can see Lubo being a cult hero only for the fact that we signed him when he was 33. He should have been past his best, and he produced 3 incredible seasons for Celtic. And we had this discussion about what it would have been like if we'd signed him when he was 23, especially the fact that he kind of made his name through French football that was at its strongest at that point. And he was capped so many times for Czechoslovakia and for Slovakia. So he's undoubtedly a fantastic player, but for the short period of time we had him, and for the age that he was at, he should never have produced what he did for Celtic.
I'm thinking of the various definitions of cult player, and I think Moravcik probably would fall in, even though he was a genius. Very much like Boric. You know, he could be in your greatest 11, without a doubt, but he probably could also go into your cult 11, and that is due to the circumstances around him joining, and the fact that he came in with a whimper, really, because no one thought he was going to do anything. Even the players have said that, Colin. You know, they saw him turning up, they didn't really know who this guy was, where he played, what foot he kicked with, and I mean that actually in a football sense. And he was just a genius, an absolute gift from God, which is one of the VHS videos that Celtic released around that time. Gift from God. I'm going to have to watch back those two videos because he was incredible. He controlled the ball with his arse. I mean, that's he's a cult hero, and I think he's a captain of this team as well.
He is indeed, yeah.
Right, so we're agreeing with one of them. That's fine. Right, who else is playing in this midfield?
So we move into centre midfield again, and look at who's going to partner Lubo. And the four options we had were Joe Ledley, Thomas Gravenson, George Connolly and John Collins. And winning by only 2% was John Collins with 33%. George Connolly was second, and it was joint third between Tommy Gravenson and Joe Ledley. Now, John Collins was my selection. I mentioned it on the last podcast why I chose him. I think it was certainly a generational thing for me. Looking back at that team in that era, it's quite hard to pick out a true legend of that era, with the exception of probably Paul McStay. So unfortunately for Collins, that's how I see him as a cult hero, and 33% of people agreed with me on almost 1,600 votes. So there's certainly a conspiring view out there, but George Connolly showing that the generational thing is out there as well, 31%, and the true loony bin of the selections in Thomas Gravenson, only 18% of the vote. So he's probably the ultimate cult hero, but John Collins makes it in there.
Yeah, and I would need to make the point on George Connolly. There's absolutely no way he's a cult hero. No way. And the thing is, he's been called Celtic's lost legend. Just look at the games he played, the amount of games he played, and look at the trophies that he won and what he achieved in the game. He's a Celtic great. He's not a cult hero. As far as I'm concerned, George Connolly is a bona fide Celtic great. And in actual fact, George Connolly's image should be up on Celtic Park's fascia with all the other legends because of what he achieved. And yes, he could have achieved more after the age of 26 had he not walked away from the game, and that created a bit of mystique around the man, which has been spoken about for, ever since the day it happened. But George Connolly was a Celtic great, and I think most people would agree with that. But yeah, Johnny Collins got in there, and who is making up the final part of this midfield, Colin? So
the number 10 role, or the left midfield, or wherever they want to play, because these guys that we're looking at here were just absolute geniuses and could play anywhere across this middle of the park. So we had Joe Miller, Andy Ritchie, Johnny Doyle and Paddy McCourt. Paddy McCourt was my choice, Andy Ritchie was your choice. We spoke about those before. And winning with 64% of the vote, it could only be Paddy McCourt. We've already went into great detail on Paddy, but you feel as if there's so much more you can say about him. He could have played anywhere across that middle of the park. And when he picked the ball up, you just knew something was going to happen. And he's one of those players, as Hugh Keevins always says, he's one of those players that gets the fan out of their seat. And that's what you pay the money to go and watch football for.
I don't disagree with that in the slightest. I think Paddy McCourt is the ultimate Celtic cult hero. I'm looking at some of the other selections there, Colin, and Joe Miller, I wouldn't have had him in as a cult hero, personally. I mean, he scored a very important goal for Celtic. He was part of the centenary team, but not a cult hero. I mean, he wasn't a maverick, was he? He wasn't one of these unhinged players. Johnny Doyle, special mention for Johnny. I've heard so many hilarious stories from his teammates, and some sad as well, some sad stories about, obviously, what happened to Johnny. God bless him and his family with regards to that at such a young age. It was tragic the way that Johnny died, and he was still a Celtic player at that time, obviously. But some of the stories, I mean, you look at, for example, the fact that he was the type of Celtic player that turned up for training wearing a Celtic scarf, Colin. He would turn up for training wearing a Celtic scarf. He was Celtic mad, and he famously used to wear, the sovereign rings, or as they call them in the Irvine Welsh books, the sovies. And any of the ground staff that gave them cheek or didn't do what they were told used to get, the in a headlock and get the solvies on the top of their head kind of thing. But one of the best stories I heard was there was a reserve game, and just while I'm telling it, I'm trying to think who told me the story. There's a reserve game, right? So obviously back then, if the first team was playing away, the reserve team would play at Celtic Park. So on the day of a Celtic Rangers game, you're talking Ibrox and Celtic Park, etc. There's this reserve game, and they're travelling to Celtic Park on the bus, and a Rangers fan coach overtakes the Celtic coach, right? And they're all giving it the usual V's up and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But Johnny Doyle used to wear the biggest crucifix you could imagine. Like, I remember I was in the Hibernian Club in Port Glasgow, and there's a massive big crucifix on the wall, like a big huge thing. It's like the size of the wall kind of thing. And Danny McGrain said that was the size of Johnny Doyle's crucifix that he used to wear on his neck. So he gets this out when they're obviously the Rangers bus is overtaken. He gets it out, puts it up to the window. He goes, the scenes that you saw, the Rangers fans were trying to get out the bus, to get to wee Johnny. So you've got to love the man. And I think obviously his notoriety is really based largely on the 4-2 game and getting sent off and everything that happened around that historic night. So great to see wee Johnny getting a mention, and there's a Johnny Doyle book in the works, and it would be brilliant to see that released so other generations can enjoy the brilliance of Johnny Doyle as well. So there you go, no complaints about Paddy, but we've got two forwards to talk about now, Colin, so take us up to the forward line. So
your forward line starts with the option of these four, and you have Tony Watt, Frank McAvenny, Darius Jakunovski and Robbie Keane.
Right.
So an interesting four there. My selection was obviously Tony Watt, as I said before, no relation, but scoring that goal against Barcelona, that makes you a cult hero for me. Mm-hmm. You went with Jackie and Robbie Keane. Obviously Robbie Keane's a world-class footballer.
Yes. But
I guess for the period that he came into Celtic and what he done in that short space of time, I can understand the cult status around that. And Frank McAvenny, well, Mac has obviously had his two spells at Celtic, prolific goal scorer, fantastic footballer. Not sure if he'd fall under the cult hero status, but he wins the vote with 47%. Jackie's second with 35%, Tony Watt's third with 10%, and Robbie Keane comes in with 8%. Now, I've actually had the opportunity to speak to Frank about this. Mm-hmm. So there's an article on the site where I spoke to Macca, and we're talking about things like the Masters Football and Legends games, and I brought up the fact that he was included within this Cult Hero 11, and he was absolutely delighted, to be honest. And what he says about his strike partner, which we'll discuss in a minute, is that, of course, we could have worked together because I'd have made him a better player. Mac is a fantastic guy, and I was delighted to have the chance to speak with him. But what we spoke about this team that we're putting together is it'd have been some night out, and now that Mac is here, it's going to be even better.
Well, I remember being asked the question a few years back, Colin, about what my greatest Celtic team was that I had seen playing, and I named it. There's been a few changes since then, and the main changes were up front, because since then I've been blown away with players like Moussa Dembele, Odsonne Edouard. So they guys weren't in my team originally, Edouard and Dembele, but they now are. But previously, my front two was Larsson and McAvenny, because I'm basing this on his performances in the centenary season and the way that he almost galvanised the team. He was the guy, the final part of the jigsaw almost, that when you look at that Celtic side, there was a huge transformation during the pre-season, players going, players coming in. But we really, really needed that bit of class up front. And Celtic were said to be chasing Charlie Nicholas at that point, who was still down in London. But we went and got McAvenny instead, and the impact he made on that team, and obviously the two goals in the cup final. If you watch back the Dundee game, the 3-0 game when we actually clinched the league, McAvenny's the best player on the pitch. He never scored that day. It was Morrison, 2 goals, Bandy Walker, but McAvenny was the best player on the pitch. And if you rewind to the New Year's Day game, the 2-0 game against Rangers, which really was massive in relation to the whole season, McAvenny scored the 2 goals. So he made it into my top 11, and I've got to apologise. He's no longer in. He's on the bench now because Dembele and Edouard have since come in and just blown me away in terms of their performances. Is he a cult player? I can see why fans would say he's a cult player because of he was a playboy, wasn't he? He was a playboy back in the 80s. He was on the Terry Wogan show. He dated a string of page 3, I'm not going to say the word, page 3 ladies. And McAvenny, he was one of the originals, you know, he was one of the original playboys. And, you know, he was on the front and the back pages of the tabloids, which I think is one of the prerequisites of a cult player. So I can see why. He certainly had his moments as well whilst playing for Celtic. We actually had the chance to speak about the game against Rangers from November '87. Yeah.
Infamous as that is. What we spoke about was when you're playing Masters football indoors, it's 6 aside for 8 minutes a half. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, so obviously you're coming up against Rangers and this is 8 minutes a half. Are you looking to try and get as many minutes in? And he says that playing Rangers in the Masters football is very similar to playing that game in November '87. He says, in fact, I actually managed a minute more in the Masters football than what I did against Rangers because I get sent off after 15 minutes. So that's just the kind of guy he is, and he's obviously got a lot of respect from the players that are around him. You've seen him as one of the greatest that you've seen. I'd have loved to have been able to see him in his prime. I think he was a fantastic footballer from what I managed to see. I guess what you're saying is right about him being off the park. That's where the kind of cult hero status comes into it. But fantastic footballer on his day, and he's welcome into this team, put it that way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's good to see McAvenny's name on a team sheet. And who's going to be partnering Macca?
So again, this was an interesting one. Basically, we're looking at our final striker. So if we go through the team, we've got Boric in goal, Anoni, Baldi, Vega, Mahe, Nakamura, Moravcik, Collins, McCourt, and McAvenny. So you're thinking, who's going to be that last striker that goes up alongside him? We chose between, you went for Paul Wilson, I went for Harold Bratback. Harold Bratback, obviously the man who stopped the 10, but the other options out there were George McCluskey. Is he a cult hero? I wouldn't say so, but also Georgie Samaras.
He's a cult hero.
Now, he is a cult hero, and he won the vote. And to be fair, absolutely hands up, he has to be in that team. And he won with 65% of the vote. And I spoke to Macca, and I said to him, you're up front with Samaras. And he said, I'd have made him a far better player. And what he had to say about Samaras was, and it's something that I think both me and yourself have said, is that after 10 minutes of the game, you could tell whether he was going to be world class or you had to take him off. Because he was just one of those players that blew hot and cold. But when it was hot, it was boiling. When it was cold, it was freezing. There was no in between with Samaras. And he's produced some incredible moments in the green and white. And there's other times where he was just a waste of a jersey.
Samaras, he's only 35. He is only 35 years of age. So, you know, he could probably still be playing. I think after he left Celtic, he wouldn't have seen the adoration that he had witnessed whilst he was at Celtic Park. He's one of the players, I think, Colin, that he left and we struggled in the left to the point where Ronnie Deila tried to play people like Lee Griffiths on the left and Anthony Stokes on the left. And I remember watching a lot of these games thinking we could still have Samaras down there. And I came up against a bit of opposition, you know, with people I know, and my brother and my father in particular, watching a lot of Celtic games, and they didn't rate him. He divided opinion. I always rated Samaras. And
definitely.
And I asked the question. I asked Neil Lennon the question about Samaras, and his response basically was absolutely no doubt about it. He turned up for the big games, and I think the actual example that was used by Lenny is, you know, going up and playing Ross County away from home. Didn't he fancy it? And that obviously is the conundrum for a manager, isn't it? If you've got a player that you know has got that ability to tear a team apart and win a game almost single-handedly, but trying to get him into the frame of mind to do it. And he performed so well in the big games. I mean, how many times did you see him bringing a ball down on that chest? The ball was, landing on this chest, and it was going nowhere.
Yep.
So,
and he did that as well. We had that spell where I think we went 4 or 5 games unbeaten away from home in Europe, and he was scoring all the time.
Yeah.
I think he scored in all 4 or 5 of the games, including the winning goal away at Spartak Moscow. So he did. He turned up for all the big games. Anytime we played Rangers, they gave him that much space because it was as if they didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't know what he was going to do, so it was just a case of let's back off him and see what happens. And unfortunately for Rangers, it cost them a lot of the time. I remember when he first signed, we were supposed to be playing, I think we were supposed to be playing Motherwell or Kilmarnock away from home, and the game got called off. And it was back when Setanta was, it was either Setanta or ESPN was the TV provider at the time, and they were going to show that game. And the Celtic team bus arrived, and the players went to go out to look at the pitch because it hadn't been called off at that point. And Samaras was so tall that he banged his head off the roof. And that was his introduction to Celtic. That was the first thing we seen as a fan of Samaras, was him banging his head at one of the first games of his tenure. So we should have maybe guessed by that point that he wasn't the brightest tool, but some of the stuff he'd done on the park was just incredible.
It was, and you go right back to, I think it was Charlie Mulgrew saying that he always smelt the tobacco. He got a speeding fine in the high street in Cowdenbeath while he was a Celtic player. Don't ask me what on earth he was doing in Cowdenbeath. Celtic certainly were not playing in Fife that day. And he's now the Vice President of OFI Crete. So I'm going to just about, in a minute's time, send him an email and ask him for an interview. How about that? Right, so
definitely.
It'd be great to have Samaras on the podcast, and we'll see if we can make it happen. Colin, who's going to be managing this Cult team?
The manager, it was kind of an easy one for the fans to choose from. We spoke about this as a group, and there's a lot of managers out there that had performances. I think you went with Frank Connors, which is a very much a cult selection, unbeaten in his only 4 games in charge. We had Dr. Joe, again, a man that probably didn't have enough time in charge to get his style of football in. If he'd had more time in pre-season, we could have maybe went on and won the league. But the overall winner was Wim Jansen.
The perm in the shell suit.
There's nothing that could be said about Wim Jansen that hasn't already been said. To me, he is a bit of a legend, and to be fair, he was my selection, but he was a one-season wonder. He came in, done the job, and unfortunately left again. But the legacy he left behind, it shaped Celtic for the next couple of years from there. And we'll always forever be grateful for Wim.
He will always be welcome back. And you're right, I did choose Frank Connor. I just thought, he's got a wee small part in Celtic's history, but he was one of the guys, Colin, who's done a lot behind the scenes for a number of years as well, and previously was probably mistreated by Celtic in the 80s when he was sacked. But that group of people around about him, you're nearly mocking and that type, they all got on really well with Frank, and it's great that he's still with us at a good old age, ex-player as well. I'm not going to allow anybody to choose the kit that this team's going to be wearing. I'm going to choose it. It's the 1970s kit that took over from the Lisbon strip. It's the floppy collar with the V insert, green and white hoops, long sleeves, no sponsor, no crest, numbers on the shorts. We had numbers on the shorts when everybody else had them on their jerseys. That is the shirt. I can see Paddy McCourt in it, Colin. That's the strip we're going to wear.
I thought you were going to say the People's kit, the Ford People's kit there.
Didn't get me started on that. We do talk quite a bit about kits on the Paul Lamb podcast, which has been renamed A Strip Down Memory Lane, and that's going to be a week-to-week podcast, which I think is hugely entertaining and very intriguing. It gives us a wee insight into the world of match-worn jersey collectors, which is a big thing out there in the world, where people can purchase jerseys for up to incredible amounts. I mean, the Stevie Chalmers auction showed us that. The Pele jersey got a bid of 38 grand that day. The Shamrock jersey went for over 7 grand. It's incredible what people pay for these items of historical relevance. But Colin, that was quite the 3-part Cult Heroes podcast, and you'll be coming back for some more of the top polls when we're looking back on what has been called the decade of dominance, the last 10 years. And we'll be hearing from you again next week. So until then, Colin, take care, and thank you for speaking to us again on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thanks, Paul. And just before we go, I'd just like to dedicate this actually to my maths teacher, who's sadly passed away over the last couple of days of this virus. He was a big football fan, and he would have loved to have listened into this chat. So thank you very much for all you've done, Mr. McHugh, and you'll sadly be missed. And he's a die-hard football fan, so he would have loved this. And thanks once again for having us on, Paul, and God bless.